"You will sit there," the dowager said, pointing past the great silver salt cellar to the bare lower end of the table, "and you will keep quiet, and you will not, on any account, draw the eye of the Duke. Do you understand me, Antonia? Tonight you are to be neither seen nor heard." The Duke of Heronden, arriving a half-step behind his hostess and not yet announced, heard every word. He stood a moment in the doorway of the great dining hall, unseen in the shadow beyond the candlelight, and watched the small drama play out. A young woman in a plain grey gown, worn, but pressed with painful care, the only such gown in a room of silk and jewels, inclined her head and went, without a word of protest, to the place she had been assigned, the very foot of the long table, below the towering silver salt cellar that divided the family and its noble guests from the poor and the unconsidered. Below the salt, he had read the phrase 100 times and never, until this moment, watched a living person be put in that place by her own kin and told to be invisible. She did not weep, she did not argue. She sat where she was bidden, folded her hands in her lap, and arranged her face into the careful blankness of someone long practiced at not being a trouble, and it was that, more than the cruelty itself, that struck the Duke of Heronden like a blow. He knew that blankness. He had worn it himself long ago, as a younger son before a brother's death made him the great man he now was. He knew exactly what it cost to school one's face into nothing while one's heart burned. And he knew that no one wore that particular mask who had not been taught it by years of small humiliations. The footman announced him. The room rose in a rustle of silk and bows, and the dowager came forward all smiles, and the long candlelit table arranged itself for his coming, the daughters of the house seated near the head where he might admire them, the salt cellar gleaming, the poor relation at the foot already half forgotten. Lambert allowed himself to be led to the place of honor at the dowager's right hand. He bowed. He took his chair. The company sat. The first remove was carried in, and the talk began its glittering practiced flow, and not one person at the upper end of the table so much as glanced toward the silent woman below the salt. The Duke of Heronden glanced. He could not stop glancing. While the dowager praised her elder daughter's accomplishments, and the younger laughed too brightly at his every dry word, his eyes kept returning to the foot of the table, where a woman in a worn grey gown sat with perfect dignity and ate her soup in silence, asking nothing, expecting nothing, having been told her place and taken it. "You have a large family, madam," he said at length, cutting across the daughter's chatter. The dowager beamed. "My 2 girls, your grace," and the smallest pause, the smallest dismissive flick of the hand, a connection of my late husband's, a cousin's child. We have taken her in, of course. One does one's duty by such cases." "Such cases," the Duke repeated. "She is no one you need trouble yourself with," the dowager said comfortably, and turned the conversation back to her daughters. He let her. He smiled and made the right replies and drew the conversation out a little longer, because he had learned, in 20 years of moving among people exactly like this, that the surest way to do a cruel thing badly is to do it in haste and in anger. He was not angry, or rather, anger had gone very cold and very clear, the way it did in him only rarely, and when it did not shout, it acted. He waited until the second remove had been laid, until the table was full and attentive, and at the height of its glittering self-regard, and then the Duke of Heronden did a thing that no one in that hall would forget as long as they lived. He stood up. The talk faltered. A duke rising mid-dinner was not in any rule of etiquette anyone present knew. The table looked to him in confusion, the dowager half rising too in alarm, a daughter's spoon arrested in the air. "Your grace," the dowager said, is the dish not to your—" "The dish is excellent," the Duke said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The silence had become total. "It is the seating I find at fault." And he picked up his own chair, the great carved chair from the place of honor at the dowager's right hand, the chair that signified everything, and he carried it himself, in his own 2 hands, the whole length of the long candlelit table, past the staring daughters and the gaping guests, and the gleaming silver salt-cellar down to the bare and unconsidered foot of the table, and set it down beside the woman in the worn grey gown. Then the Duke of Heronden sat in it, below the salt, beside Antonia Bellew, and turned to her as though she were the only person in the room. "You will forgive me," he said gently, for her alone, though the whole hall hung on every word, "for taking so long to find my proper place. It is here. It was always going to be here. I simply had to be shown the way." Antonia had gone very white. She stared at him, the careful blankness shattered, her hands trembling in her lap. Up the table the dowager made a small, strangled sound. No one else moved at all. "Your Grace," Antonia whispered, "you must not. You will, they will, I am not." She could not finish any of it. "You will make a great trouble for yourself, sir, sitting here. Please, go back to your place. I am nothing. I was told to be nothing tonight. Please don't." "You were told to be nothing," the Duke said, "by people who have never in their lives understood the difference between a person's place and a person's worth. Allow me to correct it." He turned deliberately to face the length of the table and the stricken family at its head, and now he did let his voice carry, calm and cold and clear, to every ear in the hall. "I have dined at a great many tables in my life," he said. "I have been seated beside heiresses and beauties and the cleverest hostesses in the kingdom, and flattered and pursued, and I have been bored at every one of them very nearly to death. Tonight I was placed at the head of this table and offered the company of accomplished young ladies, and bidden in so many words to take no notice of the connection seated below the salt." He paused. "I have taken notice. I find that the only person at this table tonight who has behaved with perfect grace, who has borne an unkindness without a word of complaint, who has neither preened for my notice nor sulked at its lack, is the one woman you told to make herself invisible. I am a duke, madam. I have spent 20 years being shown the most expensive faces in England. I assure you I know dignity when I am at last permitted to see it, and I would rather sit below the salt beside one person who possesses it than at the head of any table in the kingdom among those who do not." The dowager's mouth opened and closed. One of the daughters had begun to cry, not from feeling, the Duke judged, but from the public collapse of the evening's careful design. The guests sat frozen between scandal and delight, for there is nothing the great love so much as watching one of their own number put another firmly in their place, and the dowager had been put in hers by a master. "You shame us, your Grace," the dowager managed at last, with a thin attempt at injury. "No, madam," the Duke said quietly. "You shamed yourselves before I came, and I have merely declined to pretend I did not see it. The shame is your own. The remedy is mine." He turned back to Antonia, and all the coldness went out of his face, and what was left was something she had plainly never been shown by anyone at that table in the whole of her life, gentle and warm, and entirely sincere. "Miss Bellew," he said, for he had taken care, in his slow patient questioning earlier, to learn her name, when no one had thought he cared to. "I have no wish to add to your distress by making a spectacle of you. We have made enough of a spectacle of them. So I will ask you only this, and you may answer me as quietly as you like, and if your answer is no, I shall rise and bow, and trouble you no further." He paused. "I find I cannot bear the thought of finishing this dinner anywhere but at your side. I find, in fact, that I should like to finish a great many dinners at your side, in a house where no one will ever again tell you to be invisible, where the salt-cellar may sit wherever it pleases, because no one in it will ever measure your worth by which side of it you sit. I am asking, Miss Bellew, clumsily, and far too publicly, and with my whole heart, whether you would do me the very great honour of allowing me to court you, not below the salt, beside me, which is, I am increasingly certain, the only proper place for either of us." For a long moment Antonia Bellew could not speak. The tears she had not shed when she was sent below the salt came now freely, but they were not the tears of humiliation. They were the tears of a person who has been overlooked her whole life, and is, for the first time, seen. She looked at the Duke of Heronden sitting in his carved chair of honor beside her at the bare foot of the table, having carried it the whole long length of the hall with his own hands to be there, and she understood that he had not done it to wound her family, though he had wounded them, and not to make a fine speech, though he had made one, but because he had looked down a table full of silk and jewels and chosen, deliberately and before them all, the one person everyone else had agreed not to see. "They told me to keep quiet," she said at last, her voice trembling but clear enough to carry up the silent table to the kin who had bidden her be silent. "I have kept quiet a very long time, your grace. I think I should like to stop." She drew a breath. "Yes. My answer is yes. I would be honored." The Duke of Heronden smiled, a real smile rare and transforming on that grave aristocratic face, and he took her hand, there at the foot of the table, and raised her worn ungloved fingers to his lips and kissed them, slowly, before the dowager and the daughters and every staring guest, so that there might be no possible doubt in any mind in that hall about whom the great Duke of Heronden honored and whom he did not. "Then come," he said, rising and drawing her up with him. "We need not stay to be stared at. There is a finer table waiting somewhere in the world for both of us, Miss Bellew, and I have a very strong notion that the company there will be exactly to my taste." He led her the length of the candlelit hall, past the wreckage of the dowager's ambitions and the silver salt cellar that would never again seem to anyone present a mark of anyone's worth, and out into the cool night, the poor relation in the worn grey gown walking on the arm of the Duke, who had chosen her before them all. He did court her, through a season that scandalized and delighted the county in equal measure, and he married her before the year was out, and the cruel kin who had sat her below the salt found themselves, ever after, conspicuously not invited to the great house at Heronden, which was, in the end, a more complete and more elegant revenge than any harsh word could have been. But Antonia never thought much about the revenge. She thought instead, all her long happy life, about the moment a feared and powerful man had risen from the place of highest honor, and carried his own chair the whole length of a hall to sit beside her where she had been told to be nothing. And on quiet evenings, when they dined alone at their own table with no salt cellar between them, and no one in the world to tell either of them where to sit, the Duke of Heronden would catch his wife's eye across the candles, and say the thing he had said the first night, the thing she treasured above every jewel he ever gave her. "Here," he would say, with his rare warm smile, "it was always going to be here, beside you. I only had to be shown the way.